who is the founder of CAMP and serves as its lead mediator. She is responsible for setting standards in mediation at CAMP and for developing a world-class mediation practice. Ms. Ollapally has practiced in the High Court of Karnataka and the Supreme Court of India for nearly 30 years. She is a founding member, coordinator of the Bangalore Mediation Center. She has been a full-time mediator since 2015. Ma'am has mediated over 600 complex civil and commercial cases, including partnerships, property disputes, family businesses, intellectual property disputes, and many more. She is nominated to the International Who's Who of Legal Commercial Mediation 2019 and as a global leader in mediation for 2020. She serves on the panel of mediators for the Singapore International Mediation Center, the American International Mediation Association, International Center for Dispute Resolution, and many other domestic and international panels. She also serves as a member of the International Advisory Board of Global Mediation Panel at the UNDP. She is a member of the subcommittee constituted by the Supreme Court of India to prepare the National Mediation Training Manual. She co-authored the Bangalore Mediation Center Training Manual. She is published widely in newspapers, law journals, and other publications. And she is also a member of the committee constituted by the Mediation and Conciliation Project of the Supreme Court of India to make recommendations for a draft legislation for mediation in India, which is now coming out as the mediation bill. I would now like to hand it over to Laila ma'am to take the session forward.
Thank you, Anubhav. And I'm so happy to see so many of you on the screen. Your names are all here, but I wish I could meet some of you, at least e-meet. So I request whoever is comfortable to come on screen, and because I'm hoping this would be a fun session where we all learn from each other. I must say that I'm trying to put this on. Anubhav, can you help me with my presentation?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, it's the fourth icon that you need to select in there.
Pardon?
It's the fourth option that you need to select in there. Right beside display settings, the fourth option. If you go right.
Right. It says display settings.
Yeah, not this one, not this one. If you go right from display settings, the fourth icon that comes in, no, the next one, the last one in this row, this one.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. So by now you would have all guessed that I'm not really the best at technology, and there's this amazing rain going on outside, very tempting. Anyway, thanks for being here, and it's my privilege to meet each of you and share my thoughts on negotiation and beyond negotiation. So we'll have plenty of time for question answers. I welcome any clarifications, anything that you want to understand better. We shall go through it at the end of the session. So all of you have been negotiating. We negotiate all the time. As a parent, we are negotiating bedtime with our children. As if we are going as a buyer and seller, we negotiate the transaction. Potential partners negotiate joint ventures. Husband and wife negotiate which movie to go for. So negotiation is a basic means of communication. When you want something from someone and the other person in return wants something from you, that communication is called negotiation. There will be some common interest and some opposing interest in a negotiation. When parents negotiate bedtime, both want bedtime, but the parents want 9 p.m., the children want 12 p.m. When buyers negotiate, they both want the transaction, but buyer wants it for 50 lakhs and seller wants it for 1 crore. So that is the opposing interest, and then a tension comes about in negotiation because of a negotiation, an opposing kind of interest. Although there is common interest, there is also opposing interest. I am sure all of you are great negotiators. Negotiation is both an art and a science, and in this session, I will try and go into the science of it. Normally, we do this in a one-day session or a two-day session. I'm going to condense it to 40 minutes. So pardon me if it's not absolutely clear, but this is a very important skill, negotiation. In fact, it is said that we don't get what we deserve in life, we get what we negotiate in life. So it's a life skill. And to go into it, first let's come into some very famous definitions on negotiation. Richard Shell has defined it. A negotiation is an interactive communication process that takes place whenever we want something from someone else, another person wants something from us. Similarly, there is Nuremberg, this is a famous definition. Whenever people exchange ideas with the intention of changing relationships, whenever they confer for agreement, then they are negotiating. So when we want something from someone else wants something from us, there is common interest, at the same time opposing interest, that back and forth communication is negotiation. And when we negotiate, there are different techniques that we use. The techniques that we use in a negotiation are called distributive bargaining and integrative bargaining. These are the two kinds of techniques that a negotiation will have. Every negotiation will have several issues. If you go to buy machinery, we negotiate the price, the delivery, the warranty. And in these issues, we use either of the techniques or both the techniques. Distributive, integrative, both are used. In order to illustrate, I have a simple example. But distributive bargaining, as the name itself shows, it's splitting the difference. And this is our default style of negotiating, splitting the difference. So for example, if you're going to buy an apartment, the seller says 50 lakhs and the buyer says 30 lakhs. So the difference of 20 has to be bridged. So what do we normally do? The seller comes down to 43, buyer comes to 35. Maybe there's no deal. If they get stuck between 43 and 35, there's no deal. If there are further concessions, then we go seller comes to 39, buyer comes to 37, and maybe they strike a deal at 38. But this splitting the difference has a tension about it. And although this is the default style that we get into, I'm sure very often, most of us have noticed the tension involved in distributive bargaining. Sometimes when I negotiate buying vegetables and the vendor and I get into this distributive bargaining, I can feel the tension in my body. There is a tension involved in distributive bargaining, but that doesn't mean we don't do it. We definitely do it. But there is another way also, and that's called integrative bargaining. Integrative bargaining is creating value. And how this is done is, although the seller says 50, buyer says 30, and the difference is 20, the buyer and the seller engage in communication, both trying to understand each other, what is each one's underlying interest, that is, their needs, their concerns, their goals, their priorities, and they try to integrate these underlying interests to arrive at a good deal. So, for example, in the conversations, the seller has understood that the buyer needs woodwork, and the seller has his own team of carpenters. He can do this quite easily. So to bridge the gap, he says, let me help you with your woodwork. The buyer in his conversations has understood that the seller needs more customers. So he says, you know, my brother-in-law needs an apartment, my friend needs an apartment, so I can bring them in. Now, both of them have created value so that the difference can be bridged a little easier. Similarly, the seller knows that the buyer has a financial crunch. He needs to get some money. So the seller has a good relationship with the bank and he says, I can arrange a loan for you. He's brought in value. Similarly, the buyer knows that the seller likes an upfront payment. He's happy to do it. Now, they both, by their conversations, by the communication that's built up in the negotiation, they've understood each other's underlying needs, concerns, goals, priorities. They create value. Now the difference is only 6. The distributive bargaining, which involves the stress, is now only in relation to 6 lakhs. And that they can bridge much more easily than the 20. And that's why we call this integrative bargaining, creating value. And that's a more productive kind of negotiation. But remember, the default pattern is distributive bargaining. So, how can we make our negotiations succeed? Number 1, prepare for negotiation. 2, focus on interest. 3, understand differing negotiation styles. And 4, be aware of barriers to negotiation. And I'll go into each one of these. Prepare for negotiation. Information, information, information. We've said it 3 times because I can't tell you how important information is for a good negotiation. We need to know why we want something, how we want it, all the information about that. Similarly, we need to collect enough information about the other side. What are their requirements? What is, how do they see this negotiation? Both are equally important in a negotiation, because a negotiation does not result in a positive outcome unless both are happy. I can tell you a simple story of A wanting to buy property and from B. So A offers 5 crores and B is very happy. He was only expecting 4 crores. So they have a deal. But subsequently, B realizes that there was a recent change in the zonal regulations and the property was converted from an agricultural to a commercial property. He didn't have this information. The buyer did his homework, the seller had not done his homework. And that can result in what we call the seller's remorse, or the buyer's remorse, or the negotiation does not fructify. So information, collect information. Next, understand what is your alternative. Why do we go and see several similar houses before we go to negotiate a house? We do that so that when we go in for our negotiation, we know if this negotiation fails, I have another alternative. So we know, if we know our alternative well, then we know when to walk away from that negotiation. So this is what we call alternative to negotiated agreement. Always have a good understanding of what is your alternative. Only then you know how to leave the negotiation and find better alternatives. There are 3 numbers that we prepare for when we go for a negotiation. One is the reservation. This is negotiation terminology. We know what is our walk away, at which point I have seen several similar houses and I know beyond this point, I need to walk away from this negotiation. I need to be prepared with that information before I go in for a negotiation. Similarly, I need to know what is it that I hope to achieve, the best that I can get out of this negotiation. That's called the aspiration. What is my aspiration? And a good negotiator will have a fairly high aspiration. So, for example, if I am willing to pay 3 crores and nothing beyond that, then my aspiration, I'm hoping my walk away is 3. But my aspiration, I'm hoping I will get 4 crores. What do you think is the opening? How do I open the negotiation? If my walk away is 3 crores, I'm hoping to get 4 crores. I'd be really happy with 4 crores. My opening should be higher than my aspiration. I'll go for 5. I'll open with 5 and I might not get 4, but I'll walk away at 3. So a buyer's opening will always be less than the aspiration and the seller's opening will be more than the aspiration. So I prepare for a negotiation. Negotiation succeeds when we prepare for negotiation. All the information, understand the alternative, and go ready with your 3 numbers. That is reservation or walk away, your aspiration, and your opening. Have this well worked out before we get into a negotiation. The next is focus on interest. As I mentioned earlier, interest is the underlying interest. So we normally take a position which is, what do I want? And if you see this, this is an iceberg. We are normally comfortable articulating our positions. How often have we thought about what is driving our position or what is driving the other person's position? And that's why look beneath the iceberg. There could be, so beneath the iceberg is, why do I want it? And it can be, that's called the underlying interest. It can be your needs, your goals, your concerns, fears, motivations. There are several factors beneath the iceberg, the underlying interest. And from my experience of failed negotiation, as you might have just heard, I'm a mediator. I work with failed negotiations, and most often the negotiation fails because the underlying interests are not articulated, are not addressed. So it's very important that we open our minds to this concept of understanding what is the underlying interest. To make this simple, for example, two sisters fighting over an orange. It might sound simplistic, but in most negotiation classes, they talk about the simple story of two sisters fighting for negotiation, for an orange. So two sisters are fighting for an orange. And sister A says, this orange is mine. And sister B says, no, this orange is mine. Now, if you really explore the underlying interest, it may be that sister A needs the orange because she needs the juice of one orange to make a nice dessert for her friend. And sister B may need that orange because she needs the skin of the orange to make a face mark for the pimples on her face. So by exploring the underlying interest, one orange is satisfying both the parties. Value is created. One orange becomes two oranges. And this is the principle of integrative bargaining. By understanding the needs, the concerns, the goals, the fears, the motivations, we are able to have a productive negotiation. We are able to trade these interests. One party might prioritize on one issue and the other may not, may have another priority. We create trade-offs. By understanding the underlying interest, we can create trade-offs, and that is what creates value. There are several examples of how underlying interests are explored in negotiation. An Indian company negotiating with a Japanese company. It was important for the Indian company to understand that the Japanese CEO had to consult his parent company for everything. That's a culture. The Japanese CEO had to save face. These are all important factors for the Indian CEO to understand to strike a deal. Similarly, in a partnership dispute, one partner needed space for expression, for free thinking, for creativity, whereas for the other partner, the priority was transparency, procedures, methods, accountability. Both these had to be understood for them to strike a deal. The manufacturer, while negotiating, needs to understand possibly that the supplier, his priority is large numbers, not the price. And for the supplier, he needs to understand that the priority for the manufacturer is quick delivery. Unless these are understood, there cannot be trade-offs and creating value in integrated bargaining. Another factor to understand for a good negotiation is the different styles of negotiation. By virtue of being a human being, we have different styles. For example, if you're going to negotiate with Donald Trump, you need to understand that his style is competing. I need to win. So go prepared to lose a bit. Or you cannot really strike a deal with somebody whose style is competing. For some, it is compromising. I win a little, you win a little. And as parents, we often compromise. One orange, you take half, the other one takes half. Both are unhappy. The dessert is a little tasteless. So compromising, I win a little, you win a little. Avoiding. Sometimes people just don't like to negotiate. They don't come to the table. Such people need more cajoling, more invitations to the table. Some have the style of accommodating. I will take 1/4 orange and you take 3/4 orange. But the anger, the dissatisfaction is simmering. You don't get the best deal. Some collaborate. When there was an understanding of what was the need of sister A and sister B, both won. They didn't compromise. They both got exactly what they wanted. But sometimes this doesn't work exactly as it is. Both might want the juice of the orange. How do you do that? When there is communication, probably they will understand, okay, I'll give you the juice, the orange. You give me the cheese. That cheese is anyway lying in your fridge and you're not eating it. But I love cheese. So by exploring different options, they collaborate and both feel that they have won. It's a win-win. So these are the different styles of negotiation. Be aware as you study your the negotiating partner. Try and understand what is his style. You must understand your style. It is to be a skilled negotiator is a journey within yourself. And when we do our negotiation classes, we conduct kind of role plays, and we're able to help people understand what's their own style. So this is very important. Next, we'll go into the barriers for negotiation. And before that, Anubhav will show you a video. Anubhav, can you run that video, please? Okay, well, before that, let me give the instructions. So here you will see a group of boys and girls passing a ball to each other. I want you to count the number of times a white shirt person throws the ball to another white shirt person. Have you got the instructions? A white shirt person throws a ball or passes a ball to another white shirt person. Count the number of times. Okay, and we'll start. Can you start from the beginning again, please?
Yes.
Okay, and continuing. I wish I could see your hands. How many of you saw something unusual? Did any of you see something unusual? I'm sure some of you have, but if you have, please give me a thumbs up sign. How many saw something unusual? I can see 2, 3, 4. Okay. Okay, great. So in this group, 4 of you saw something unusual. Did you see a gorilla passing across the screen, waving his hands at you and moving on? I think the ones who saw something unusual would have seen that. Am I right? So I continue to see the, yes. Yes. Okay. And can you put that on again? A gorilla passing across the screen that some of you have not seen.
So play it from the beginning, ma'am.
Yes, please. So, Anubhav, where's my share screen? It's not showing. Okay.
Ma'am, we'll have to use the different screen for sharing. You might have to do it again. It's on your laptop.
So I go back. Go back.
Yes. You'll need to stop sharing once and.
So I escape.
Yes.
Okay.
Escape and stop sharing.
Okay. Then what do I do?
Ma'am, you would need to drag it from the laptop to the desktop once and then start sharing again.
Well, you're all on my laptop. Okay, why don't you continue now?
Yes, I'll do that.
So what you just saw was barriers to negotiation. Why do you negotiate? Your attention is so gripped that you might miss some important pieces of information. Next slide. So when I gave you that instruction, count the number of times. That was one task. The second task was white person, white shirt person to the next one, to another white shirt person. I got your attention gripped, and as a result, you missed important information. We see that in negotiation very often. When there is a difference, when there is a disagreement, then the attention is gripped to explaining why you are right with your position. Those positions polarize. And then there is a communication breakdown. There are barriers that begin to operate. And what you saw just now was selective attention. That's called cognitive barrier. Sometimes the barrier is informational. For example, what we mentioned earlier, the seller did not realize what his property actually, where it fits in the zonal regulations. And we see all the time. I recently, some time ago, I mediated a case that the dispute was going on for 18 years between a buyer, a joint venture, the owner and the developer, and they didn't have clarity on what was the exact area. They went to court. After 18 years, they had no information. They hadn't done a joint survey. What is the common areas? They had no information. So there are informational barriers. Sometimes there are emotional barriers to partners, to founders wanting to split. One founder recently went through a bad divorce where he got taken to the cleaners. Now he was not willing to give an inch in this negotiation. As a mediator who helps people negotiate, I had to spend a whole day with that person going into the emotions of the earlier divorce until he was ready to logically, rationally negotiate the split with the other partner. Sometimes there are structural barriers to people negotiating. They don't understand each other's cultural assumptions. The language might be a barrier. There's no translator on the table. Or the right people, the influencers, are not part of the negotiation. So these are all barriers to negotiation, which we need to understand. This is just a small number that I've given. If you read this book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow by Daniel Kahneman, there are, I think, about 60 or 70 cognitive barriers itself that he has listed. So this is a big science on our brain not being as rational or reasonable as we think. In fact, Daniel Kahneman starts his book, "Is man a rational being?" He says, no, man is an irrational being. So being aware that there are barriers is very important to a successful negotiation. Next slide, Anubhav. So here is when we go back to our topic, negotiation and beyond. If negotiation gets difficult, then what is the answer? Bring in a neutral who can work with both parties to negotiate. I've used this picture of a duck because the neutral appears to be calm and comfortable in this slightly adversarial disagreement. But beneath the water, there is a lot of work that's going on. What does this neutral do? The neutral, a skilled, trained mediator, is working with parties who are getting intensely distributed. Positions have polarized, communications have broken down. The neutral is building communication. Neutral is somebody who has the calmness to work with both parties to build trust. You know, when there is a disagreement, there's a trust deficit in the room. And very often, this neutral is the only person in the room who both parties trust. So the trust quotient in the room is being built up by this neutral. Similarly, when parties are not able to explore underlying interests, communication is broken down. It's to the neutral that they speak. It's the neutral who's constantly looking out. What is the underlying interest? And when there are too many barriers, informational, structural, the neutral has zoomed out to understand what are these barriers? How do I set it right? A neutral is calm and helping parties with these issues, helping them to create different ways to resolve this dispute. And the elements of what a neutral does is in the next slide. Anubhav? Principal negotiation. What are the factors of principal negotiation? Continue its animation, essential elements. First, separate the people from the problem. And that requires the neutral will be soft on the people, kind to both parties, understands their emotions, help them to prepare the numbers, helps them to understand the realities. It's soft on the people, but hard on the issue. Go into the documents, understand Bhatna, Vatna. So a neutral is soft on the people, but helps the parties to understand the issue by maybe bringing in a valuer, by getting an expert opinion. These are different things that the neutral will do to be hard on the issue, but all the time retaining the comfort of the people, making them feel calm, making them feel trusted. So that's what the mediator does. Second, focus on interests. We've already gone into interests. Third, create multiple options. When interests are understood, then there is a configuration of the interests of both parties into an option so that both can agree. After all, in negotiation, there's no outcome if both don't agree. So the mediator works with both parties to configure the interests in such a manner that both are adequately happy and there is a win-win. The neutral mediator takes these options back and forth until parties find the terms that they are both adequately satisfied with. And finally, next one, the mediator always works with objective criteria. What is the fairness? Both parties need to feel that there is a fairness. So they work with, for example, what is the sub-registrar's value that is brought in, or what is the inflation index, what is the precedent on this, what is the case law on this. Mediation always, or most often, has lawyers with them. So the negotiation and mediation is under the shadow of the law. The parties always need to understand, if this negotiation fails, I'll have to go into court. And what is the reality in court? So often in mediation, when I do a reality in court check with the parties, they soften. So these are the elements of principal negotiation. And this is the science that is derived from a famous book on negotiation. It's a Bible for negotiators. And next slide, it's called Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Urey, professors in Harvard. And this is really a small book, which I request all of you to read. A skilled mediator masters the art of negotiation as given here and works with parties who are struggling with their negotiation to move forward productively. So that's why the title for this topic today is Negotiation and Beyond. Next time you negotiate, I hope you can think of these principles, and if there is a problem, get in touch with a mediator. Thank you. Any questions? If anybody has a question, you can come on. I can see some hands up. Who would like to go first? Ankita? Because you're first on my screen.
Sorry, I forgot to take down the hand. This was during that gorilla thing.
Okay, okay. Anybody else? If you have a question, Harsh?
Thank you for the session, Laila. It was absolutely wonderful. Laila, just one question. How do you tackle people? So like you mentioned that there are various categories of people who are competitive, right? Starting from the who negotiate differently, starting from the competitive ones all the way down to the collaborative ones. Once you have decided that the said person is competitive, how do you bring down that person to, become collaborative at the end?
Well, you may not be able to, Harsha, thank you. That's a good question. You may not be able to get that person to be collaborative, but your awareness that this person's style is competitive would, if you are not a competitive person, if your style is not competitive, you'll be willing to give that other person a little more so that you have a deal and move on. But you have recognized the style. So if you negotiate with Donald Trump, you'll have to let him win. Well, otherwise, there are consequences. But if you want to win with a competitive negotiator, you may have to give up a little bit. A competitive negotiator may not be too comfortable with integrative bargaining, and maybe a mediator would be able to help you to work with that person, separate the people from the problem, do the reality test with him. So in such situations, if it's really getting challenging, bring in a third party neutral. Have I answered your question, Harsh? Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sakshi, you have a question?
Yes, ma'am. I wanted to ask that the motive of negotiation is to crack the deal. But in some cases, if the value is decreasing, like there can't be a deal with that value, whichever the seller is agreeing to. So then what should be the right action for it? Like how should be negotiation done in that case?
I'm not fully understanding your question, Sakshi. I'm hearing that the value of the property is coming down and you need him to give in. Can you just explain that again to me?
Yes, ma'am. I wanted to say that if there is some property and I am the seller,
right?
The person is the buyer.
Okay.
And in negotiation, there comes a situation where what the value I'm suggesting or giving is actually I am at loss and I could not agree to the amount the buyer is asking me. So what should be the right action in negotiation for me to do it?
Okay, so we did see the essential elements of a principled negotiation. What you could do is to bring in some objective criteria. What was the the apartment sold in this block? What is the price of it? And how you're justified in holding that this is the price. So you possibly may have to justify why you are expecting a certain price. And that would be an important element. Then go back to the principle negotiation in getting to yes, that book. These are some of the things that are mentioned. So objective criteria would help. Yes, Lakshman?
Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome.
Hello, ma'am. It just made me curious while you were on the slide of principal negotiation and mediation. You say that you have to separate people from the problem.
Yes.
It's quite interesting to know how do you do that, because these people come on the negotiation to talk about their problem. So how do you basically take that problem away from them and put them in perspective?
So what it means is when you negotiate, let's take it out of the mediation aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But when you negotiate, you cannot, if you're going to attack the person, they get more defensive and they dig their heel in more. So be kind to the person, soft on the people, but be hard on the issue.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, the employer finds the employee is coming late every day. Be kind to the employee, don't be harsh with her, but collect enough information. Since when has she been coming late? Understand why she's late. Maybe she'll tell you that my bike had a breakdown, it's in the garage. So you are soft on the people, but are hard on the issue. You got your information on why, how many days she's been late over the last 1 month.
Okay.
So that's what I mean by soft on the people, but hard on the issue.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we have answered all the questions. Yes, Stephen?
Yeah. When do we use push and pull techniques to understand the interests so that I can become or can my other person come with a move from destructive to collaborative?
Did you ask when do you, I didn't hear you very clearly. When do you use?
When do I, as a buyer or as a seller or buyer, typically do I use my push and pull techniques to understand the interest of the other person so that we can come together to collaborative negotiation?
So Stephen, the distributive and integrative bargaining, we use both. Like you saw that slide on integrative bargaining. There was a 6 that had to go into distributive. So you can use integrative, distributive. It's like, when you ride a horse, you pull both reins. At some point you pull one, and the other point you pull the other rein. Similarly, in negotiation, you use these techniques, integrative and distributive, where appropriate, depending on the situation. Does that answer your question?
No. What I want to point to is that when do I use a push and pull technique of asking questions to understand the interests of the buyer and seller, and therefore I can move from distributive to integrative negotiation.
Yes. Okay. When do you use? What do you mean by push and pull?
Supposing I do not know what interest of the person, so I may have to use a different workaround or verbiage of questions or something to ask so that I can validate my assumption, what may be his interest, or whether how much I can negotiate or come down.
Okay. So one good technique, Stephen, is to ask open-ended questions. Like, let me understand why, what makes me think the value of this property is 50 lakhs. Let me understand. So open-ended questions where you are allowing the other person to talk more. And through that, you can collect more information. So asking open-ended questions is a very good way of getting more information. Can I see the collaborative and competitive negotiator slide once again? Anubhav, can you put that up, please?
Yes.
Ashutosh would like to see that. No, further down. Further down, Ashutosh. Yeah, this one, understand differing negotiation styles. Is this the one, Ashutosh? No. Yeah. So the different styles. Okay. Competing, I win, you lose. Compromising, I win a little, you win a little. Avoiding, both lose. They don't come to the table. Accommodating, I lose, you win. And collaborating is I win, you win. Is that okay? Yes, Lakshman, you have another question? Any more questions? So I think we've answered all the questions, and thank you so much. It was wonderful being with all of you, and looking forward to more interactions. Thank you.